2 Oscars and a $100 million name are impressive. But they are not the most remarkable part of Denzel Washington's story. The most remarkable part is who he almost became before any of it. Long before the awards, the standing ovations, and the global recognition, there was a boy growing up in Mount Vernon, in a home balanced between faith and struggle. Born on December 28, 1954, Denzel Hayes Washington Jr. was raised by a disciplined mother, Lenny's, and a father who was a Pentecostal minister. Their household looked steady from the outside, but inside, tension quietly shaped his early years. His father was deeply spiritual yet distant, while his mother was firm and relentless, creating a push and pull that defined his childhood. 14. Everything shifted when his parents divorced, leaving him drifting in a neighborhood where gangs and drugs were never far away. He later admitted he could have easily gone down the wrong path, pulled by anger and proximity to trouble. What changed his life was his mother's decision to send him to Oakland Military Academy. He resisted the strict structure at first, but over time it instilled discipline, resilience, and the understanding that talent without control means nothing. Yet an even deeper turning point came in a church when a woman told him he would one day travel the world and speak to millions. At the time, he was just a young man unsure of his future, but those words stayed with him. He enrolled at Fordham University, initially studying journalism before discovering acting, after being accepted into the American Conservatory Theater. In San Francisco, his path began to take shape. The early years were difficult, filled with rejection and financial struggle, but he persisted, driven not by fame, but by purpose. His first major break came with the TV series Saint Elsewhere, where he built a steady foundation. Then came Cry Freedom, earning him his first Oscar nomination, followed by Glory, which brought him his first Academy Award. But while his career was rising, his personal life faced challenges. He had married Paleta Washington in 1983, and fame brought temptations that tested their relationship. Instead of letting it collapse, he made a conscious decision to fight for his marriage. Recommitting himself to faith, including a deeply personal baptism in the Jordan River, they renewed their vows, choosing each other again with full awareness of what they had nearly lost. As his career grew, Hollywood tried to define him, offering roles that limited his range. He refused to be confined, choosing integrity over comfort. His performance in Malcolm X, directed by Spike Lee, was widely considered one of the greatest of its time, though it did not win him an Oscar. Years later, he took a major risk with Training Day, playing a corrupt and dangerous character that broke away from his established image. The gamble paid off, earning him his second Academy Award and solidifying his legacy. Despite his success, personal losses shaped him deeply. His father passed away before witnessing his greatest achievements, leaving behind a quiet longing for approval. That absence influenced how he raised his own children, especially John David Washington, to whom he made sure to say the words he never heard himself: "I'm proud of you." In doing so, he broke a generational cycle. Beyond the fame, awards, and iconic roles, his life became defined by faith, discipline, and intentional choices. He continued to challenge himself, returning to theater, mentoring younger actors, living by a simple philosophy: put God first, work hard, and give back. Today, Denzel Washington stands not just as one of the greatest actors of his generation, but as a man who refused to surrender his values along the way. His journey is not about perfection or constant success, but about choosing integrity in moments when it would have been easier not to. The real story is not the awards or the fame, but the transformation of a young man who stood at the edge of the wrong path and chose something greater, building a life defined not by what he achieved, but by who he became. That choice to become, rather than simply achieve, continued to define Denzel Washington long after the applause became routine and the expectations grew heavier. In the years following his second Oscar, he entered a different phase of life, one where success no longer proved anything externally, but demanded something internally. The industry still offered him power, influence, and opportunities most actors could only imagine, yet he approached them with increasing selectivity, guided less by ambition and more by alignment with his values. Not built in public moments alone, but in private decisions no one would ever see. He spoke often about discipline, at his punishment, but his freedom. The same discipline that had been forced upon him as a teenager in military school had now become a personal code. Early mornings, prayer, reflection, and a constant return to purpose became his foundation.
Oh.
While others in Hollywood chased relevance, he focused on consistency. While others feared being forgotten, he focused on being grounded. It was a quiet shift, but a powerful one, turning him from a star into something far rarer, figure of stability in an industry built on constant change. His relationship with Pauletta Washington deepened over time, not because it was easy, but because it was chosen again and again. Decades of marriage, tested by fame and pressure, became one of the strongest reflections of his character. He never portrayed it as perfect, never reduced it to a fairy tale. Instead, he described it as work, commitment, faith, a partnership that survived because both were willing to grow through difficulty rather than escape it. In a world where relationships often collapse under less strain, theirs endured as proof that stability is built, not found. As a father, he became intentional in ways shaped by his own childhood. With John David Washington and his other children, he created an environment where love was spoken, not assumed. He understood the cost of silence and made sure not to repeat it. Watching his son rise in films like BlacKkKlansman and Tenet was not a moment of comparison but of pride. It represented something deeper than success. It was continuity, its growth, and the passing of something meaningful from one generation to the next, even as he reached his later years. He refused to settle into comfort. Returning to Broadway, he embraced the rawness of live performance, where there are no second chances and no edits. It was a reminder to himself that mastery is never finished, that growth requires risk, and that true craft demands presence. He mentored younger actors, not with distance, but with honesty, often reminding them that fame without foundation can destroy faster than failure ever could. He also carried forward the influence of those who came before him, particularly Sidney Poitier, whose legacy had opened doors that Denzel would later walk through and expand. When Poitier passed, it marked not just the loss of a legend, but a realization that the responsibility now rested more heavily on his shoulders. He was no longer chasing the standard, he had become it. In the end, what defines Denzel Washington is not the roles he played or the awards he won, but the life he chose to build behind them. A life rooted in faith, tested by struggle, and strengthened by decisions that often went unseen. The boy who once stood at the edge of the wrong path did not just escape it, he transformed it into something purposeful. And in doing so, he left behind more than a legacy of performance. He left a blueprint of character showing that true greatness is not measured by what the world gives you, but by what you refuse to lose while gaining it. And even now, with decades of achievement behind him, Denzel Washington continues to move with a sense of unfinished purpose. Not urgency driven by fear, but intention shaped by clarity. He has often said that ease is a greater threat than failure, that comfort can quietly erode the very edge that once pushed you forward. So he resists it. He chooses projects that challenge him, conversations that stretch him, and a lifestyle that keeps him anchored rather than elevated above reality. There is a deliberate humility in the way he carries success, as if he understands how easily it can distort a person who stops questioning themselves. He has become, in many ways, a teacher, not through formal titles, but through example. Younger actors watch how he prepares, how he speaks, how he walks away from opportunities that do not align with his standards. He does not preach perfection. He speaks about discipline, accountability, and faith with the authority of someone who has failed, corrected, and continued. In interviews, his words often feel less like advice and more like reminders, simple truths repeated until they become habits. Put God first. Stay grateful. Work harder than you think you need to. These are not slogans to him. They're survival principles. There is also a growing awareness in him of time, not fear of it, but respect for it. He understands that influence. Like opportunity, is temporary, and that what matters most is how it is used while it exists. This awareness has shifted his focus outward. Giving back, mentoring, supporting, and guiding have become central parts of his life. He no longer measures impact by the size of an audience, but by the depth of a connection. One person reached honestly matters more than millions reached superficially. His journey has also redefined success in a way that stands in quiet contrast to the industry that made him famous. Success for him is not the accumulation of roles or recognition, but alignment between belief and action, between private character and public image. It is waking up with clarity, living with intention, and going to sleep without regret over what was compromised along the way. That standard is far more demanding than any award could ever be, and far more difficult to maintain. And perhaps that is the final evolution of his story. The young man who once needed to prove himself has become a man who no longer needs to prove anything, yet continues to demand more from himself than anyone else ever could. The anger that once pulled him toward the wrong path has been replaced by discipline. The uncertainty that once clouded his direction has been replaced by faith. The silence he once experienced from his father has been replaced by words of affirmation he now gives freely to his own children. What remains is not just a career, but a life that carries weight beyond the screen. A life that reminds us that the most important battles are rarely visible, that the most meaningful victories are often private, and that the person you become is shaped far more by the choices you make when no one is watching than by the applause you receive when they are. In the end, Denzel Washington's story does not ask you to admire him. It asks something more difficult. It asks you to examine yourself, to consider your own path, your own discipline, your own values. Because his journey is not extraordinary simply because of where he ended up, but because of what he refused to become along the way. And that is a standard that does not belong to Hollywood. It belongs to anyone willing to live by it. And that is where the story quietly turns back on the listener. Because the life of Denzel Washington is not meant to stand at a distance, admired like something unreachable. It is meant to confront, to challenge, to ask a question that lingers long after the final scene fades. What are you becoming when no one is watching? He never pretended the path was clean. He never claimed to have avoided every mistake or resisted every temptation. What sets him apart is not perfection, but correction. The willingness to stop, to look honestly at himself, and to choose differently when it mattered most. Again and again, at the exact moments where it would have been easier to drift, he decided to anchor himself instead, in faith, in discipline, in responsibility. Those decisions did not make headlines, but they made the man. There is something almost paradoxical about his journey. The higher he climbed, the more grounded he became. The more the world celebrated him, the less he seemed to depend on it. Fame did not define him because he had already defined himself long before it arrived. That is why it never fully consumed him. It tested him, certainly. It pressured him. It tempted him. But it never owned him. And perhaps that is the quiet power of his story. It's not the awards, not the iconic performances, not even the legacy he leaves behind in film. It is the demonstration that identity, when rooted deeply enough, can withstand anything placed on top of it. Success does not have to corrupt. Pressure does not have to break. Tension does not have to distort. Not if there is something stronger underneath. In his later years, there is a calmness to him that cannot be performed. It comes from knowing who you are, and more importantly, who you are not. It comes from having faced the versions of yourself that could have taken over and choosing not to let them. That kind of clarity cannot be taught in classrooms or captured in scripts. It is earned slowly through years of quiet decisions that stack on top of one another until they become a life. So when people look at Denzel Washington and see greatness, what they are really seeing is consistency. Decades of choosing the harder, right over the easier wrong. Decades of returning to the same principles when everything around him was changing. Decades of remembering where he came from, even when the world tried to convince him he had outgrown it. And that brings everything back to the beginning, not the Oscars, not the fame, but the boy in Mount Vernon, standing at a crossroads with two paths in front of him, One easier, louder, immediate. The other quieter, harder, uncertain. He chose the second path. And then he kept choosing it over and over again, long after the choice stopped being obvious. That is the story. It's not a rise to fame, but a refusal to fall. Not a tale of talent alone, but of character built under pressure. Not a man who was given everything, but one who decided, in the moments that mattered most, who he would be, and then lived like that decision meant something. And in the end, that is the only part of the story that truly belongs to him. Everything else, the awards, the recognition, the legacy, was a result. But the becoming, the quiet, unseen becoming, that was always his choice. And even after everything has been said, there is still something about Denzel Washington's story that refuses to be fully captured, because it is not a story that ends neatly. It continues quietly, daily, in the way he lives when the cameras are gone and the spotlight has moved on to someone else. There is no final scene where everything resolves, no moment where the work is declared complete. For him, the work is the point. He has reached a place where reflection carries more weight than recognition, where the question is no longer what have I achieved, but what have I built within myself that cannot be taken away? And that question changes everything. It strips away the noise of success and leaves only what is real discipline, faith, integrity, and the choices that reinforce them every single day. There is a quiet awareness in him now, an understanding that the influence he carries is not accidental. People watch him, listen to him, measure themselves against him, whether he intends it or not. And instead of resisting that responsibility, he leans into it carefully, knowing that example is louder than instruction. The way he speaks, the way he pauses before answering, the way he refuses to glorify the very things that once tempted him. These are all part of the message. He does not try to present himself as untouchable. If anything, he does the opposite. He reminds people how close he once was to losing direction, how easily his life could have taken another path. And in doing so, he removes the illusion that greatness belongs only to the chosen. He makes it clear that it belongs to the committed, to those willing to make the same difficult decisions repeatedly. Long after the initial motivation fades, time has given him perspective, but it has also given him urgency of a different kind. Not the urgency to accumulate more, but to pass something on. To ensure that what he has learned through experience does not stay locked inside his own life. Whether through conversations, mentorship, or simply the way he carries himself, he is constantly leaving behind pieces of that understanding for others to find. And maybe that is the final layer of his story, the part that does not announce itself. The realization that a life well lived is not measured by how brightly it shines in public, but by how deeply it impacts others in ways they carry forward. That the true legacy is not what people remember about you, but what changes in them because of you. So when you look at Denzel Washington now, you are not just looking at a man who succeeded. You are looking at a man who endured, who corrected, who believed, and who kept choosing a path that demanded more of him than the world ever required. And in that, he leaves behind something far more valuable than fame. He leaves behind an example, quiet, steady, and unshakable. One that does not ask for attention, but earns respect. One that does not promise ease, but proves that difficulty, when faced with conviction, can shape a life into something meaningful. And the story, in its truest form, does not end with him. It extends outward to anyone willing to ask the same question he has lived his life answering. Not what you will gain, not how far you will go, but who you will become when the moment demands a decision. Because in the end, that is where every life is defined. Not in the spotlight, but in the silence. Not in what is given, but in what is chosen. And that is where his story leaves you standing, at your own crossroads, with the same quiet, powerful choice still waiting to be made. And at that crossroads, there are no cameras, no applause, no guarantees, only the quiet weight of a decision that will shape everything that follows. That is the place Denzel Washington knows better than most. Not because he stood there once, but because he has returned to it again and again throughout his life. Different moments, different stakes, but always the same question beneath it all. Will you stay true to what you believe, or will you trade it for something easier? What makes his journey resonate is not its distance from ordinary life, but its closeness to it. Details may be larger, the stages, the roles, the recognition, but the core is familiar. Temptation, doubt, pressure, the desire to be seen, the fear of falling short. These are not celebrity struggles, they're human ones. And his story strips away the illusion that success removes them. If anything, it amplifies them. He has often said that when you pray for rain, you have to deal with the mud too. It is a simple line, but it carries the kind of truth that only experience can give. Every blessing comes with weight. Every opportunity comes with responsibility. And every level you rise to introduces a new version of the same test. Will you hold on to who you are, or will you adjust yourself to fit what the world rewards? In watching Denzel Washington over the years, what becomes clear is that he never allowed the reward to rewrite the rules.